This is the beginning of the study of Theodore Clement Steele's painting of birch trees. I have primed my canvas. In this case, it is the Stillman Burns sketchbook, and I have primed it with Zinsser and a little bit of blue and red acrylic paint. I brushed it on both ways, just regular cheap acrylic paint, so that it would dry. And I put a pretty thick coat of it on the surface because this paper tends to be very absorbent. And I've put clips on it to hold the paper down so it doesn't buckle so much. I am using French ultramarine blue, Cad red medium, an old tube that is broken. I'm trying to use it up. And permanent yellow light, or Cad yellow light. I just want 3 primary color shades. And I wanted to demonstrate, I love this little metal, thank you Harriet, this little metal crimper that will efficiently get more paint out of your tube. The plastic ones don't tend to hold up very long for me. They get stripped out. So 3 colors. I do have some leftover permanent rose and a little bit of a warm yellow mixture that I left on my palette. I am using a glass shadow box that I got at Hobby Lobby with a piece of Gray Matters palette paper underneath, or gray paper. I think it's just gray toned drawing paper. The glass makes it very easy to clean. I have 4 bottle caps with just regular clove oil from the health food store, health food segment. It keeps my paint wet for weeks and weeks on end. The clove oil does not mix with the paint. It is just in my palette. Somehow the fumes keep the paint from drying out. The earth colors will dry quickly, sometimes within a week. So if you're using raw umber, sometimes the yellows will dry. The reds, yellows, and sometimes blues will stay wet for a very long time, even up to 6 months in some cases. I'm going to go ahead and mix a base of what I see in this painting. It's predominantly a green painting with brown tree trunks and kind of a raw sienna, burnt sienna ground area. So I'm going to mix up, and I want to use some thin down paint with mineral spirits to draw with. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up just a base pile of green. I use a small palette knife so that I have smaller controlled piles of color, and I do like to pre-mix so that I have a dress rehearsal, so to speak, of colors on my palette. Now, as I mix up the green, I can tell right away that this ultramarine and bright yellow are going to make a green that I really don't see anywhere. It's a blue green. So I'm going to add, the only thing I can do to fix this is add a tiny bit of red, because we know that red and green make brown. So that's going to knock some of the bluish tint off. Still not quite right. I'm going to add a little bit more red. And we are getting closer to kind of a brownish color now. Just put a little bit more dirt in it. So that's giving me kind of an olive green. Now I need it to be lighter. So really the only way I have to go is to add more yellow. That's my lightest. I don't want to get into any white this early on in the painting. So I can see quickly that that's almost exactly what I need for this painting. Boom, right off the top. It's just mixing the 3 primaries. Usually I will start with the lighter color. I started with blue this time, but it's blue and yellow with a speck of green in it to get this sort of dingy color. Now I like to make 2 or 3 values of the color that I'm working in, just so that I can begin to think in value I always want to be thinking in not just color, but color value, as Kinsler would say. And I want a lighter version of this yellow, all the way down to, I'm not going to get this light today, but just so that I can kind of see where I'm going. And I'll have an area that's almost pure cad yellow. Whoops, I had some dark in there. Almost cad yellow, pure cad yellow down here. I want to see, and I accidentally grabbed a little bit of red in there with that, but that's okay. I want to see at least 3 distinct values here. These are pretty close to the same. Now the other color I see is brown. So I know that typically I can get brown 2 ways. I can get it, or many ways, but I can mix orange and blue to get a brown, or I can mix red and green to get a brown. So either way, it's still these 3 colors. So let's start. Let's make another green so that we can stay consistent and keep things as simple as possible. Very chromatic because of our bright yellow. Mix some red with it. Tone that green down. Oops. See, you want to go slowly in increments, and there's a brown already. So as I'm mixing, I want to ask myself, is that the general brown that I see? I hold my palette knife up, and it's pretty close. I see some really, really dark browns in there. Today, we're going to mass in a general tone. It won't be as dark as it will finally be, and it won't be as light as it will finally be. There will really be no detail in today's session. So here's one that's a little bit more orangish. And that one's a little bit darker. And I think that's good. Now I'm gonna continue on with this because I'd like to have the general mass tone for the ground. So let's mix up, because it's more orangey. Let's mix up an orange. Let's go at it this way. That's pretty close right there. Put a speck of blue in it. Because I don't want it, I just want it to be a middle tone of what we're doing. All right, so that's really all we're gonna need for this first session. We're gonna draw a little bit and mass in the overall tones that we see. We're also gonna make sure that things are blurred today. And I have blurred the image in Photoshop so that we won't be tempted to jump into details too quickly. So I have pulled out my mineral spirits, and I have a number 2 round medium bristle brush. I'm using a glove today just because I make such a mess and it'd be easier to clean up, and I just bought a new box of gloves. I don't worry too much about getting it on my hands, but I wanted to show you the consistency that I want to draw with. And it's mineral spirits. If you're using acrylic paint, you could just use water. You could put a little bit of Flow Aid or something in it to give it so it doesn't dry so fast, but I'm going to be drawing with paint. The drawback to this is that the mineral spirits will absorb out pretty quick, so the paint kind of gets dry and it won't move around as easily for you. But since we really don't have a lot of drawing to do on this, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to work with using paint to draw with. A lot of people feel more comfortable with charcoal. Paint, if you have a really complex drawing and you don't get finished the first sitting and you go back the next day, it will completely dry, and you'll have a hard time getting your colors, getting your lines on there, and you'll be struggling with a drawing that won't erase. It's like it won't erase. So this is the consistency that we'll be using, and I just wanted you to see that with the brown paint. Typically I want to use something very light first. As I feel more confident that my drawing is correct, I'll move into a little bit darker with less mineral spirits in it. I have my easel up fairly straight for video reasons, but it's a good idea not to lean your easel back too far because you'll get a lot of reflections if you do that. I would leave it straight up and down. You can see that my paper has buckled a little. I've used these chip clips. You can use bulldog clips to try to hold the paper a little more taut as you're painting. I'm moving this so that it doesn't obstruct what I'm doing on the computer monitor. I also have the monitor pointed down a little so there's not so much reflection in it. Like I said, the paint quality is very loose and runny. And one of the things I wanted to note in the beginning here is that I've used a rule of thirds grid line in Photoshop, and I figured out a way to do that with Photoshop so it automatically puts the grid up for you. You can barely see it on this image. I'll pull up the other image and you can see that the lines are exactly in thirds, both vertically and horizontally. And that is just a good place to start for your rule of thirds composition. We just studied that in the composition class last week and the week before. So you can see that the top of the ground is about exactly on the left side of the canvas, about exactly 1/3 of the way up. The horizon line, that is the horizon line. You do see a hill in the back here. You can see that this tree is on the third line right here on the left side. This tree is close to the third line on that side. So those are just some good markers as you're measuring and trying to determine where everything goes in your drawing. I would come over here and divide mine into thirds as well. That's a little high. Just to kind of stay on track. And if you're not sure, just use the back of your brush to measure. A little bit off there, so my eyeball's not that good. Let's see now. There we go. So I don't always do this, but you can do it if you want to. It's a great thing to make sure you're putting your focal point in one of these intersections. It also may help me with my drawing a bit. I don't want to draw them all the way through there, but I want to have an indication of where they go. All right, and you can see that it's really watery. It will erase. I just toned this canvas about 20 minutes ago, so it's going to be absorbent. It's probably a good idea to tone in advance so that it's really good and dry and you don't have any stickiness to it. There's not much drawing to this. All we're really going to do is indicate where the ground begins. And I can kind of see that it comes out over here about halfway down in this third. So just resist the urge to make everything really perfect. I can see, and why don't I just go ahead and put that little line through here? That'll make it easier to check myself because I don't think I'm right. So there to there, there to there, and there to there. So a little bit should probably go this way. You think it's easy to judge these distances, but when you really look at it, it's harder than you think. All right. All right, so I can tell that this tree here, and typically I like to start with what's in the distance and work my way toward the front. So I see a bit of a tree back here. It's thin. It's very, as we learned in the landscape class, keep everything soft and blurry in the distance. And we also learned that trees get smaller as they go up. So when they get wider, like I just did there, you know something's off. So it doesn't hurt to have a little clean brush to use as your eraser here. and make sure that your tree trunk gets smaller as it goes up. And it's about halfway up this third here. I see a bit of another one back here. Again, no huge detail here. This is a bit more of an angle. This tree we can see comes right along in here. Not quite half, so don't let yourself go too far down with it. Works its way over here. How wide is it? Well, it's not halfway. It's not half of this third. It's a little less than half. So about here. And it goes out the bottom about there. It doesn't really get much smaller as it goes up. So, but don't make it straight like a ruler. It is a tree, so it will, like we learned in the Alfonso Dunn video on cylinders and tree branches in last week's lesson. Make them irregular, and it doesn't hurt to be a little nervous when you do that. Get a little bit of a wiggle going there. I can see here's my divider line, so I can see that this tree, this looks like maybe 2 trees there. Let me go back to my original here. Dot the lines. Yeah, I think that is 2 trees. So the one is right on this line and comes in front a bit, like this. Then down the hill. And one of the things that I hope that we will learn from this is just how far to take your details. How much detail do we want to put in a painting like this? Here's the other tree in the background. It looks like it's kind of down behind the other tree. Gets lost in the branches. We're not going to really draw. We may indicate a few branches, but we're not really going to worry too much about drawing branches right now because we are going to paint this whole background in. There is and I'm going to go ahead and just mask that in. That'll help me remember that that tree is back behind there. Goes up to the third. I think it is a good idea to go ahead and draw your thirds in here. We'll paint those out. The reason I use the lavender tone I mentioned last week is so that the color that might glow through a little bit. I see a couple of places where the background is cool and almost a lavender tone, but it is also the complement of the yellow green on the color wheel. So it will be a harmonious painting. He probably didn't put a lot of lavender in here. If we saw the real painting at the museum or up close, we might see that there is some lavender in it. I don't know. But it's our painting. We're studying it. We get to try to reproduce it the way we feel is best. This is the front here on this tree. Okay. So this is pretty crude. There are a few trees here in the background we could just indicate. This one I've indicated, and then another one here. So just as we're painting, we have some idea of where those will end up. I think that one stops a little more than halfway here. You don't really see any more of that down here. Okay, so I've changed my image now back to the Gaussian blur filter. That's really made everything soft and blurred. I might use a tiny bit of this Mineral Spirits because I already have some on my palette just because I want to paint these darks in thinly. Typically, I've always been taught to mass in the darks first. And the reason is that there is no white or light color yet introduced to the palette. And actually there's some nice texture on there just by dragging it. So we may be able to use that for tree texture some as we move into the next stage if I don't fill up the tooth too much. But I want to go ahead and mass in. I don't even really have to squint much because I've already got it really blurred. I'm not worried about it being perfect right now. It may be easier to do the green background first so I don't have to come in around these trees. And I think, okay, I went ahead and put a little bit of brown on this tree, just kind of testing out my brown. It's going to go on really thin, but I'm going to go ahead and mass in the darkest areas of green first before the trees. It'll just be easier. I don't have to squint much because I have put the blur filter on I'm going to use a little bit of mineral spirits just to get on this first layer before we've added any paint. It's okay to use a little mineral spirits. Not much, because you see how watery and drippy it gets, and I really don't want to have that quality in the paint. I don't want it dripping. I don't want it that thin. I just want it to move around. And I really want just a kind of a blur today of where we're going. Asking myself how things line up for these divider marks. Remember, this first stage, especially if you're out in the field painting, it's not very gratifying. We're just trying to block in about the general tones and where they go. I don't think I'm going to use that much mineral spirits. I think I'll stick with the pure paint if I can. I'm not going to go as light as I eventually will, or as dark. I just want something kind of close. So that's the darkest green. There's some of that over here right on the thirds line. And then I'm going to move to the medium middle tone green, which I see all along in here. I'm not going to worry about that light. I'm just going to mask that in right now. I want to see the general tone along the side of this tree here. So don't get excited and think you're going to be really walking away with a wonderful masterpiece today. So much of painting is learning to wait, knowing that a better stage is coming right around the corner. I'm still squinting even more because I don't want to look at branches right now. I don't want to look at individual clusters of leaves. I just want to mass in the general shapes of light and dark that I see. I see these little triangular shapes kind of coming in from the side. A little bit darker up here. And we watched Michael James Smith, I believe was his name. We watched his layer where he was putting the texture in. And if you remember, the underpainting was really crude and choppy and messy. We're familiarizing ourselves with the overall composition of it right now. We're putting it in the simplest format. Simple shapes and blocks of color and value. Really just trying to get the canvas covered. Now the lightest, I didn't mix up enough paint. the lightest area is smack dab in the middle here. It will get lighter than this, but I'm going to go ahead and I just mixed a little bit of cad yellow light into that green mixture. And I am not going to do the coloring book thing. I want to paint over my drawing lines a bit so that I don't end up with that cut out and pasted on feel, and I don't struggle with halos later that I have to go back in and correct. There's a little bit more of that. Really light. Over here you've got, let's see, 2 trees, one kind of in between. So I'm just going to knock all that off there, all the way up. Kind of lost my bearings here. Yeah, it's okay. And this is really good exercise for you to learn how to simplify things before you. Some people start right off with detail in the beginning. And this is a different way to paint. This is a pretty detailed painting, but all the leaves are very, very abstract and soft. So this is dark, this is dark. There's more light down here. And it just helps you get an overall view of where you're going with this painting. Now that I got a little bit of turp in my brush, by the way, I'm using a number 4 filbert. It says flat, but I've worn it down to a filbert. Flat would be fine too, whatever feels comfortable in your hand. And 4 is a good size for this size of paper. This is a 9x12 Stillman Burn sketchbook. So the thing I notice in that left side is that it's dark, middle tone, light. So that's what we're after, is the general tone right now. And I got so much green in my brush, it's not making that quite light enough, but that's okay, because we will be working on it again. 1, maybe 2 more times. Little bit of light filtering in this way. Got 1, 2, 3, yeah. And this is where you get to just sort of play. You don't have to get stressed out. You can just play and enjoy yourself and block in the general tone. See, if we'd have spent a lot of time drawing branches and all that, then we would have had to be real careful as we worked around the edges of those. And it would have driven you crazy. All right, again, very thin coat at this point. I got a little too thin up here in the corner, so I want to put a little bit of a heavier layer in the dark areas. These come down farther. And I have to tell you, I'm always a little bit nervous on this first stage. So far, all the Old Masters paintings we've done together, when I first lay it on, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can pull this off. What if I have to start over? Well, what if I do? Well, there's a lot of trouble to video and all that, but so what? You just start over. That's what we do. Or we scrape down, or we paint over what we're doing, or we just keep working it through until we get the problems corrected. But there's a little bit of inhibition every time, I think. Oh, I don't know if I can pull it off. That's something that goes through my mind. And especially when I'm doing it for you guys, in front of you, in front of the camera. I'm like, well, it's looking pretty rough right now. This second branch goes down under the first line of thirds. So I can go ahead and put a little bit of that in there. Just so I have that little map. Okay, I'm going to put the green brush down, or clean it. And I'm going to get another filbert about the same size. And I kind of asked myself what came first. So the sky and the trees back in the distance, then the ground, and then the tree trunk. So I'm going to do the ground next, which is this burnt sienna color that I mixed up. Just the general tone of it. Kind of scrubbing it on. And I did put enough Zinsser this time. I've learned from past paintings that if I don't put enough primer on this, whoops, that's the tree, isn't it? If I don't put enough primer on here, I fight with it because it's so dry. It just sucks up every bit of the paint. It won't move around for me. But once I get one layer of paint on, it works a lot better. And this is working better than it did before. So it gets a little darker as it moves over toward the corners. And that's a good compositional thing to remember. If you have really light colors on the corners of your painting, it has a tendency to lead the eye out of the painting. And I am not vignetting this painting. I'm going to finish it all the way to the edges, if I can. Got all this wax paper in here to separate my pages, and giving me a little trouble there. The lightest area on the ground is right in here. This is darker. Got some green in it, and I can come back in and put that in. I'm going to mix a little more yellow. Lighten this area up a bit. Oops, I don't want that much yellow. That's too orangey. Yikes. I had too much red in it, but that's okay. Whatever you've got, just get close to what you see. If it's a little too bright, that's okay. I'd rather have some pretty bright color glowing up through here. We will adjust. The whole problem that some people have is they won't get anything on the canvas. They're timid about getting something on the canvas. And that does a couple of things. It breaks your creative flow. When you're doubting yourself, it will show up in your work. The doubt, believe it or not, makes its imprint on your work. I'm going to go back to my green brush for a minute. I want to go ahead and mass in a tiny bit of green, just because I think it's an okay thing to do at this point. Remind myself there's some green down there. So really, just be free today to play like you were in kindergarten. And not stress, because we really aren't thinking about detail today. If you get an area like that too dark, and you want to, if you have a good surface, you can come back in there and lift some of it off. And it wouldn't be a bad thing to just wipe this whole thing at some point, to just so that you just kind of have a shadow image left over. Yeah, I'm going to put a little bit of that green in there. Don't worry about any of these sticks. Everything, again, is blurred for a reason, so we won't get in there and start piddling with it. So I have 3 brushes. I have the dark brown that I'll use on the trees. I have the green, and I have the burnt sienna color for the ground. It helps if you keep your brushes separate like this, because then you don't muddy your colors so much. It's a great habit to develop early on and try to keep throughout your painting process. Now I'm going to go ahead and try to lay these trees in. And I came over them a little bit and made them skinnier, which is good because now I can paint over the top. You see them, all these colors so far are going on very lightly, very thinly, thin. Not worried about detail. A thin layer. And mix up enough paint to where you don't have to stop right now and mix more paint, which I'm pretty close to having to do. Develop the habit when you first start your painting of looking at the size of your canvas, looking at the piles of paint you've mixed, and adjusting. Try to stay within that. What you think you'll use. This goes down the bottom. So see, I'm going to have to mix up more brown, which was blue and yellow with some red in it. All three colors. It's a little trickier getting the exact same shade now, so all right, there we go. And I usually like to start with what's behind, so let me grab a little bit of the darkest dark I have. It's got a little bit more blue in it. I don't really like that being so blue. Thinking about my third line. Put a little bit more red in it to knock off some of that blue. There we go. If anything at all today, I would make sure that all your edges are very soft and blurred. It is so easy to go back in and make a sharp edge. It is not as easy to make a soft edge. A little bit of tic-tac-toe stuff going on up here. And then back to this front tree. Whoops, no, that's not the front tree. I screwed up. Here's the front tree. So just like with flower petals, it's easy to get lost where you are. What am I working on? Here's the front tree here. And the beauty again of when you put Zinsser or gesso on a sketchbook page or a board, if you'll go both ways with it, you create a bit of a weave similar to a canvas, which gives you a little bit more tooth so that you're not fighting with something that's slick like glass. And I don't mind if some of that lavender shows through. I hope it helps for you to see the stages that mine are in the beginning here. I think that's one of the benefits of doing something together like this. We all have different likes and we don't want to do the same thing. But when you do a study, we have a specific goal in mind, and that's learning either skin tones, learning how to do trees, learning how to do bark, which is what we're doing here. And when we are together in these stages, it's not as scary because you see that you're more on track. Whereas when you're doing something yourself and you're in this icky first stage, it can be daunting. It can be so daunting that it makes you want to quit. That's coming from the front of that tree a little bit, and we learned about that last week. I want to just put a little indication. I may totally paint over some of these, but I want to put a little indication of these trees in the background. I'm paying attention to how close they are to this tree. Okay. This one's very dark up at the top. It's the cylinder. Think about the cylinder and how the light hits the cylinder. The light's coming and hitting here. The light on this tree is hitting right along the edge. Go ahead and just mask that in. We can correct the values and texture on these trees later. When I'm doing anything that's a cylinder, whether it's an arm or a tree trunk, I like to put the first strokes in lengthwise, if it's going this way, that way. And then I like to come back and crosshatch and affect it the opposite way, which gives it more of a, I'm going to switch to my burnt sienna color and go ahead and just put some of that, because it's so strong on this tree, some of that burnt sienna color in. A little bit of that over here along the edge. And I could get rid of this grid line. Let's see. There we go, that helps. So I got rid of the grid line so we can see a little bit better. There's some space in between this tree here, some light. So let's look. Do we want to use some of the background color shining through there? Or is it more of a, did mention, I don't know if I mentioned this is a round size 2, pretty sturdy. Pretty sturdy bristle. It's an ivory, so it's not quite like a hog hair. I want to go ahead and put that a little bit in there so I'll remember it, because that creates some depth right there to have that little bit of light. And it's a warm color. It's a warm, light color. Okay, the only other thing that I want to do is, let's see, I kind of goofed up over here, so let me come back with some of the cad yellow light mixed in with my green pile and correct. Let's see, here's my wide tree. That is not a tree there. And there's another branch here. Pay attention on trees if the branches come out evenly or if they're staggered. And these are almost even. This one is a little higher. So I'm switching back to my brown brush. Go ahead and indicate this one. And I want to widen this one a bit. So with just a little effort, really, I feel like it's not enough to cover, to fill a full class this time. But I think if we give ourselves a little bit more grace and not feel like we have to get the whole thing painted in one session, I think we'll learn more about patience. All right, any other, let's see, we've got a big branch coming out. Here's where my divider line would be. It's coming out like, let's see, here's this one. This is a little bit lower, right across here. Or maybe that was where I meant for it to be. I think it's a lot closer to here. Don't make them too straight because branches grow so much a season. Then it comes out here and down. Some come in here. So now I've got, a lot of choppy stuff. I could kind of go around it and back up, because that's something I forget to do often. squint my eyes, look at it from a distance. I'd like to use, again, some of that lavender tone. If I were going to do a quick study, I could just wipe it out. But this is a cotton t-shirt. They're your best, my favorite rags. Just wipe a few spots out where I want the light to shine back through. This tree here. And if the rag doesn't do it, you put a little bit of mineral spirits on there and lift it off that way. Did a little too much there. And I want to, make sure things are blurred today. So I don't want any hard edges anywhere. I'd rather have things just soft and blurry, even the tree trunks. So my little sky holes that I wiped out here, I'll reshape those a bit. Make sure things down here are soft, that you don't really have any real hard edges. Just so much easier to paint back in if you don't have a bunch of hard edges. I think I say that 100 times in every class. But just because I fought with it for so many years, my hard edges. Finger does a good job sometimes too. Okay. Okay, if you've reached this stage, you've got the canvas covered and you feel like your lines are too sharp, here's a few options. Some people use a huge brush, a huge flat brush. I don't like to do that, but myself, I just feel like I don't know, I feel too out of control. But here's a mongoose, here's a goat hair mop, and here's just a little watercolor brush that's really soft. But you could just knock the edges off with this. And this paper absorbs the paint so much that it hardly will move. So this, I probably could use a big flat hake brush or hockey. I'm not sure how they say that. Just to soften things. I'm not sure that should be that way. And don't stress over it. This should be, that trunk needs to be a little bigger at the bottom. That's it.